Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston.
We're your hosts and real-life sisters who binge on historical drama.
We'll talk about films, fictional adaptations, and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
So fill your teacup or mug with your favorite sip as we explore what's fact, what's fiction, and the so what on historical drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston. Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, where we talk about historical films and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. Listen to past episodes and sign up for our newsletter on our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters to stay up to date on new episodes and bonus content. In this podcast episode, we're talking with Reinaldo Marcus Green, who directed Paramount's Bob Marley, One Love, starring Kingsley Ben-Adir as the Jamaican reggae icon Bob Marley and Lashana Lynch as his wife, Rita Marley. Bob Marley, One Love premiered February 14th and debuted number 1 at the box office.
Bob Marley, One Love celebrates the life and music of Bob Marley, who inspired generations through his message of love and unity. The film chronicles the reggae icon's powerful story of overcoming adversity and the journey behind his revolutionary music. In the film, Bob Marley has become a political voice in Jamaica. He aims to bring peace between Jamaica's warring political factions, the Jamaica Labour Party led by Edward Seaga and the People's National Party led by Michael Manley, at the 1976 Smile Jamaica concert in Kingston. As Bob Marley and the band prepare for the concert, armed assassins break into his compound, shooting Bob, his manager Don Taylor, played by Anthony Welsh, and Rita Marley. Don, Bob, and Rita are hospitalized but survive the shooting. The Marleys realize Jamaica's political climate is too dangerous for them to stay. Bob Marley, Rita, and their family go into exile. Rita and their children join family in Delaware. Bob and the band head to London, where they reconnect with producer and Island Records founder Chris Blackwell, played by James Norton.
Rita Marley rejoins Bob in London. In 1977, Bob Marley and the Wailers record and release the legendary Exodus album before launching a major European concert tour. The tour is a success, but tensions mount between Bob Marley, his manager, and Rita. The film also gives a window into Marley's marriage and early childhood. Bob and Rita have known each other since their early teens and have weathered many storms. In addition to being the mother of their biological children, Rita has also mothered her husband's children from his extramarital relationships. We see their courtship in a series of flashbacks. We also see Bob's struggles with the memories of abandonment by his white father. The ghost of the past and uncertainty about his future weigh heavy on Bob Marley's mind. But Bob sets himself on a path to return to Jamaica with his unity message and to share that message and music with the African diaspora. Bob Marley, One Love is produced in partnership with the Marley family and features a musical soundtrack that includes classic Bob Marley songs. Script writers are Terrence Winter, Frank E. Flowers, Zach Balin, and the film's director, Reinaldo Marcus Green.
We now introduce director Reinaldo Marcus Green. Reinaldo Marcus Green is a writer, director, and producer. He is best known for directing the critically acclaimed Warner Brothers film King Richard, starring Will Smith. King Richard was named one of the top 10 films of the year by both American Film Institute and the National Board of Review. The film received 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and earned Will Smith his first Oscar win for Best Performance by an Actor in a Lead Role. King Richard also received 4 Golden Globe nominations and 4 BAFTA nominations. Ronaldo's first feature, Monsters and Men, premiered at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and received a special jury prize for Outstanding First Feature. Ronaldo's other credits include director and co-executive producer on the Netflix series Top Boy, executive produced by Drake and Spring Hill Entertainment, director of his sophomore feature film Joe Bell starring Mark Wahlberg, distributed by Amazon and Roadside Attractions, and director and co-producer for HBO's limited series We Own This City, written by George Pelecanos and David Simon. Welcome, Reinaldo, to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters.
I love being here. Thank you. I'm honored.
Yeah, it's been a while, or been a minute, as we used to say. So good to see you.
You as well.
So big, this is a big person, Bob Marley. Big, big. But we all were introduced to him at some point in life. How were you introduced to Bob Marley and his music?
I think Bob was always around the house. My dad loved music, always played music in a high school band type thing. And, Bob's records, among others, were always around the house. I always remember my dad playing Bob and Bob being around. I can't remember exactly the age and all that, but it was definitely an influence to us. And my dad was very much a revolutionary in spirit. He named my brother Rashad Ernesto Green after Ernesto Che Guevara. He named me Reinaldo Marcus Green after Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey is who Bob studied, who Bob read about the Black Liberation Party and bringing folks back to Africa. So it was always around in some form or fashion. It didn't dawn on me until I was much older what my dad was doing, but he certainly had it, had Bob's influence in our household.
That makes me remember when I was a teenager in high school, every morning, Howard University's radio station, WHUR, when it was independently owned, would play Three Little Birds every morning. And that was our morning song to get the day started. I'm not going to sing because I can't sing.
No, for sure. We were the Three Little Birds because we grew up in a single parent household with my dad. And that song was certainly an impactful one for us. And the way we, interpreted that song, that's, a lot of times how music can be very effective in your life and others.
Yeah, we all have those soundtracks that kind of play along in our own histories.
Exactly.
So what intrigued you about the One Love Film Project to come on board as the director? How did they hook you on this one?
Well, the music. Once I learned that they actually had the rights to the music, it was a huge, huge piece to the puzzle. I mean, it's like, it's a gift. Bob's music, as we all know, has, been so impactful around the world for decades. And so once I had the music, it was like, well, that's like half the battle. Can we make a movie around around this amazing piece? That's the hard part, it's like, and I guess it's always like one of those situations where, you can always fall back on the music. That was always sort of in the back of my mind. It was a fail safe. You can always put on Bob if all things fail, system, abort mission or whatever it is. Bob's music can get you out of jail. So, his music, his message, everything, at least what he represented in the music is what we tried to focus on, and what I think is important for the next generation to know about him. Look, he wasn't a perfect man. He wasn't a perfect person, but no human is. We tried to focus on the things that we thought are most important to pass on. And when you're doing a movie, you have all these different avenues to try to focus on what areas of someone's life, and I'm sure people can dig into the histories that they want to. We thought that these were some impactful moments and timely moments for today's audience, and what we wanted to leave behind, at least a small snapshot of Bob's life and what he was after.
Yeah, it's interesting. Often when a film comes out, there's a lot of interviews with the actors, and actors talk about how they prepared for the role. And particularly with biopics, it gets very complicated because everybody has their version of the person, right? And their own history with them. But I'm really interested in how you, as a director, what was your process in preparing for this film?
Well, it was twofold because a big part of my job in this particular role was as a writer, was coming up with the structure of the film, in part with our co-writers and figuring out what part of Bob's life. And fortunately for me, as a co-writer, I'm also thinking about it cinematically. What would make it interesting and fun, and what would make it come to life? And so we had a few things that we were grappling with this project. Bob's visions. It was known that Bob had visions. And so how do you depict that? What is a vision? How do you do that in a way that's cinematic, but also makes sense? We also have flashbacks, traditional flashbacks in the film. How do those work with the narrative? When do you flashback? What do you see when you flashback? And what perspective do you flashback? And then our sort of main timeline, our A story. And so those three components were the trickiest things to try to find the balance to. You know, oftentimes two of them are problematic. So when you add a third, it's really juggling and trying not to confuse. And hopefully what we came up with is something that that works. But that was probably the hardest balance. And language is a huge part of our film. Obviously, we're shooting essentially a foreign language film,
Mm-hmm.
no subtitles, and that in and of itself was probably the largest and most important component to the film, in getting it right in terms of its authenticity. So, you know, to answer your question, because I'm a co-writer on the film, I'm coming into it in a slightly different way, and my preparation started a lot sooner than it typically would if I were just coming in as a director. So I'm coming in from the script point, I'm coming in from the story, so I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle because of the script nature of it. As a director, there's so many different ways to prepare. It's like I'm a sports guy, so I think about, a coach watching tape of other teams. You trying to learn your offenses, your defense. You're trying to learn the weaknesses, the strengths, and then you're trying to prepare your team for battle, I guess, if you will, or competition. And that's the way I like to think about my role as a director. But I also like to think about it as an invisible role. It's not one where I'm typically in front of my players. I'm behind. It's all about the players. But if we do our job right, they feel supported and they can win a championship. So that's how I think about my work, and how I work with my crews, how I work with my cast, in order to build something that feels hopefully seamless. When I think about sports, I think about, it's funny. My wife watches baseball. She thinks it's boring. And, she doesn't understand the nuance of the game, and it makes sense, right? It's long. They're sitting out there. It doesn't seem like they're doing that much. They make it look easy, and for me, that's the art of the game, is making it look easy. And try, because it takes such an effort to make it look easy, to make it look seamless, is the part which is the fun part for me. When it feels like you're in a war, and then you're in a war, it feels sloppy to me. It doesn't feel like you're crafting something. And so part of the art of directing, which I'm learning still very much early in my career, is trying to make it seamless, or trying to make it look effortless, even though there's obviously a lot of work that goes into that. And you just get better at that. You get better. And I think the more preparation, the more time you have to prepare, the more seamless you can make it appear. That's part of the magic trick. It's like, how do you make those things feel like the edit feels smooth, or the transitions feel beautiful, or the performances feel seamless, or the casting feels natural. All of those things are part of the directing process that it doesn't really get spoken about, but it's about the team. It's about the win. It's about the victory. And that's the way I think about my job, if that answers the question.
Yeah.
I do want to tell you this as I was watching the film. Speaking of sports, etc., seeing Bob Marley and his band members jogging in London, there was something so freeing in that. I don't know if you caught the subtext of that, but they looked so free, like free. Because usually, if you see something like that, black men jogging with dreadlocks, etc., you're anticipating, oh, what's going to happen to them? Oh, something's going to go wrong. They're going to get attacked. But the way it
Or arrested.
But the way it showed up on screen, and they're just, got their sights right ahead of them, and they're just jogging. I don't know. I got something out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you just never know what piece of a film is going to affect people and what's going to speak to them in a different way. And Reinaldo, as a director, you were really talking about, you are dealing with a lot of moving pieces. And I think a lot of people don't. I mean, I directed theater, so I know what it is to have to, you're not responsible for everything, but ultimately the buck does stop with you because you're the one making the choices. And one of the things that I know, having stayed in relationship with a number of my former, uh, student, colleagues from Howard and University of Michigan, et cetera, is that you're constantly honing your craft. You're never done growing. And, actors have coaches. My directing professor, her acting students still, ask her, what'd you think? How did I do? And she has some directing students who still call her too when they've seen her production. So I'm curious about you as a working professional. You no longer have your peers in college and your professors who are giving you feedback and the critical analysis that helps you grow. And you mentioned about you're continuing to learn. So as a working professional, where do you go for the feedback, that trusted feedback that contributes to your continuing artistic growth and development as a creator?
Yeah, I mean, I've stayed in touch with my, some of the folks that I continue to work with and have had a lot of experience. And so a lot of my recent crew, my DP, Robert Elswit, has been making movies for 45 plus years. My editor, Pam Martin, 25 plus years. So a lot of the crew that I am around have been continue to make movies. And I think what's great about them is that they actually work more than I do because they can. um, when you're an editor or a DP, you can stay on the field a lot more. You can shoot 2 or 3 films a year. You can edit more than 1 film a year. As a director in film, it's very hard to work on more than 1 project in a year or 2 years or even 3 years. And so they're a lot more active. And so they work with other directors, they work with other DPs, and so they're constantly learning, whether it's new camera techniques, new camera equipment, new camera stuff. And I check in with them. They become friends off the field, so to speak. And so I have collaborators that have more experience than I do. And we love to talk about movies. We love to watch movies. We'd love to talk about what we liked about them or what didn't work so well for us. And, it's just being a student, I guess, is continuing to watch how other directors are doing it and what they're doing and how they're evolving. Who are the young cats out there, who are moving the needle forward. And I think it's just watching and learning. Its music, it comes from so many different places. But yeah, at some point, you start to develop your own path and language and start to listen to that voice more than probably I did 7 or 8 years ago. I'm not much different, but I guess I'm slightly more evolved. And I guess that comes from experience. It's okay. This worked better on this film in this environment. But the environments continue to change, the landscape continues to change, and you just have to stay abreast to what's happening. Last night I went to an event and I heard James Cameron talking about what he does and how he does it. And for, the 7 or 8 minute speech, it was just like an inspiration. I don't know what I do with it. We do very different things, but I felt energized by hearing someone of his stature talking about film and the way he was talking about it in the way that he's still a student, talking about it in how he approaches something that you see every 7 or 8 years. It's like a comet. It's like he's not making a movie a year like Ridley Scott, or 2 movies a year. He's making a movie every 10 years. And so it's just a very different approach to filmmaking. But you take all the different ones and see what kind of works for you. When I started thinking about myself I think there's marathon runners and there's sprinters, and I'm neither one, and so I just had to think about what pace do I go at? That's just my pace, and I think when you first start, you try doing both. You try being a marathon runner, you realize that that's not working. You try being a sprinter and you realize that that's not working. So you have to kind of find your place, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
your rhythm, what pace do I go at? And then you have to build your internal mechanisms that work to that pace, but knowing that you work in an industry that goes at a specific, if you're running a 400 meter, that's what you're running, so it's a tricky balance to find how you work in a system that's built, in a specific way. And so you just have to try to find how your rhythms play into the system.
Speaking of environments, one thing that I definitely noticed is that principal photography for One Love was on location in Jamaica and London. And, we've heard these musings about AI and, will that
CGI,
will that wipe out location shooting? But I think location tells a story and definitely puts your team, your actors, your players in an environment that enhances their performance and their understanding of the story. So tell us about filming in these locations. What exact locations did you use in these 2 settings? And why was it important to film at the actual sites of Bob Marley's life where events took place?
Yeah, I mean, part of it for me was in the research process was trying to figure out, okay, how I was going to stage something or block something, so oftentimes you try to find the real thing, because we did have to replicate a lot of things. We did have to we shot a lot on set. So even though we were in London, we shot a fair amount on stages. But we tried to go to the real spaces, even if the building didn't exist anymore. So for instance, in London, we went to 42 Oakley Street, where Bob actually lived, but it's someone's house. So we couldn't shoot in the actual house, but I wanted to shoot on the street because I wanted to know how far Albert Bridge was from his house. So I could actually see the bridge from the house. And I said, oh, that's really cool. So he would run from the door over the bridge and he'd go right to the park. So it made sense. I wanted to know how far the park was from his house. So did he take the train? Did he take the bus? Did he run? And so I could create a map, for us to follow. And there was no one specific thing. It wouldn't really matter to an audience. They would accept whatever we gave them. But for me, it was just making sense of it. Okay, well, if Bob played soccer in the park, how did he get there? And it made sense if it was only a half a mile away that he would run there. And so we were able to visualize the film by just trying to understand those components. Now we could build the house. So when you look at the outside, I asked, I knocked on the door, can we get in? Okay. Now you could see the architecture had changed, just by some of the modern trimmings in the house, but the bones were there. And so just being there, you could say, okay, well, Bob had the top floor how far was that from the bottom? Okay, so just to literally make sense of it from the script standpoint, because as you know, as a director, it's like actors want to know all of it. They want to
Yep.
know
Yep.
everything. Just
The
and they
best
want to
ones.
just that you did not figure out.
Right.
They want to trip you up on all the stuff that they discovered, and it's like a student in class. Like, I learned this, and I want to tell you all the stuff I learned. And that's the fun of it, right? You're trying to the chess teacher has to know more in some way than the chess player, or at least know how to get out of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's part of the building of the film is trying to visualize those things. So we tried to walk the path that Bob walked, at least. Okay, a lot of those spaces don't exist anymore. It's a period piece. So we had to rebuild, or we had to create spaces, but we try, obviously, we had a lot of reference material that we can choose from, and we tried to be as accurate as we could, with those spaces. So that's London. And then Jamaica, same thing. Fortunately for us, not a lot has changed in Jamaica. That's also an unfortunate thing.
Mhm.
You go to Second Street, and it's not much different than it was when Bob was there. Some modern colors, some modern cars. But if you take those things out, it's pretty much the same.
Mm.
Which is sad in some respects, but obviously for purposes of shooting in the film, it was an added advantage for us. So we went to the spaces that Bob was, and part of it was spiritual, right? You're there. He walked here. He played football here. He slept here. And I think for the cast or crew, those are things that are intangibles. They're not things that you can describe. They're just things that you feel, and it adds a certain layer of authenticity. I feel like I'm in the same space as Bob, or where the Wailers played. Wow, they were here. He must have sat here. So your imagination can go many different places once you find those real places. So for us, a lot of it was texture and feeling, which creates an environment for success, even when you're recreating those spaces. So the approach is always from the research. Look, I always want my actors to go into the spaces. We went to it's called 56 Hope Road is an actual museum.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's changed from its original architecture. So we actually ended up building the house, but it was closer to what he actually lived in. So our build our replica of 56 Hope Road is closer to where Bob lived than the actual museum. And so we tried to find those moments to create that level of authenticity. And then you find really great craftsmen to help you, and so when the actors go into those spaces, they don't feel like props. You never want them to feel, you want them to feel real. That's a real guitar that really can play if I pick it up. So that the props don't feel like, so that the props don't feel like props, that the set design doesn't feel like you're on a set. It feels like you're in a real space. And so we try to create those environments for our actors and our crew, because if it feels fake, it usually will, that's how they'll perform it. So we try to create real environments for the cast and crew.
You've been enjoying Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. Share this podcast. Join our historical drama community by signing up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content.
Now, back to our podcast conversation. Speaking of working towards authenticity, more and more biopics these days are about people who, if they're not alive, their family and friends are still alive. And Rita and Ziggy Marley are still here. And they were involved with, or it certainly gave their approval for this film. How did their participation help shape the film's story and the direction it took?
Yeah, I think, Ziggy Marley is a producer on the film, and I didn't know from the very beginning what level of participation the family was going to be involved in. But I was obviously receptive to it. But he was on the very first call in the hiring, in my hiring process. So he was selecting the director of the film. And so I knew very early on that this was a heavy family involvement. If the son, the eldest son of Rita and Bob Marley is in the room, I knew that the family was going to be involved pretty heavily. And I felt like from that very first call, we had a really great connection, call it spiritual or just the humanity that was there. How his disposition felt very warm, but also strong. Felt like he had the time to invest in the story. And through Ziggy, I was able to meet many of the other family members. Of course, I wanted to meet all the Marleys, but that wasn't in the cards. I did get the opportunity to meet Rita, Stephen, Rohan, Sedella, and and then I met some close friends of the court through that process. Part of it was don't ask, don't tell. I'm making a movie, and how the family can support, I'm not sure they can fold into the process of making a film, because I'm sure every family, mine included, has its has its inner workings, and that felt like a web that was not my responsibility. My responsibility was to make a film and my responsibility lied with Bob and trying to create a story that would, continue his legacy. And so my main point of contact was Ziggy. Our main focus was making a film about his father. And that's the way I communicated with him, very much so that he can communicate with the other siblings and other family members in that way. So it never became personal. Of course, it's personal. It never became personal in the making of a film. And so we can talk in filmic language. We can talk about cinema. We can talk about, you can move it out of the documentary. Oftentimes families can hold on to memories. And those memories aren't always real. They're impressions. And I know that from my own memories. I remember certain things about my childhood, but it's how I remember them. Was it real?
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask my mother, she has a very different memory than I have. And we were both in the same space. And so I say that to say is that was their truth. And that's valid. Your truth is valid, but it may not necessarily be real. And so we're trying to make a film based in some reality, and some truth, knowing that all of these stories are just that. They're just stories.
Yeah.
Every book is just a story. Every memory is just a story. And you're trying to find the commonalities in all of those stories, like an investigator, and so there's facts, and then there's editorial, and then there's journalistic things that you're documentation, and you're trying to find the common thread throughout all of those things to say that's close enough to the truth.
Yeah. And then there's your own time lens that you're putting on it, which is why we have multiple versions of stories about people or multiple interpretations of literature that people, how many versions of Pride and Prejudice are there now?
Is this
right?
called the Rashomon effect?
Yeah.
I mean, we should do the Rashomon because it's an interesting way to think about it, right? And
Yeah.
I always try to, when I go into a film, my mom doesn't. I think about it like my mother as an audience member. Did I like it? Did I have an emotional reaction to it?
Hmm.
It's a movie, and the second you go into movie language, it's all fake. It's all fake, all of it, every single movie, no matter the real ones, the made up. It's all fake. And you're just trying to get as close to a version of a truth that you feel best represents what you're trying to do, and oftentimes, I'll get asked, did the shooter really come into the house, and did they really have that moment together at the end of the film? And I'll just pause for a really long time and think about it. Do you think Bob would allow a man to walk into the house and just be that close to him with all those people? Like, the reality of that becomes very clear it's a metaphor.
Hmm.
It's a metaphor for something much bigger than that. Forgiveness it's not literal. And so, it's movie language. And you start thinking about things that it doesn't make it any less true.
Right. Back to
Just
redemption song, right?
exactly. It doesn't make it any less true. So making something non-literal doesn't make it any less true. It's an interpretation of a truth.
Hmm.
And so I try to, that's part of the journey of this film, and any film is an interpretation of a truth.
Yeah. And even his lyrics are interpretations of truths. You think about Buffalo Soldier. Um, and I love Exodus. That's my song. But I do have a little question back to the family. Just it's probably a clarification question. They have the rights to the music, all of Bob Marley's music.
So I don't know the exact rights situations, but the thing I knew going into the film was that there was an agreement between Paramount and the Marley estate regards to a certain number of tracks that we could use in the film that were cleared by the Marley estate. Outside of that number, I think licenses are elsewhere and rights are elsewhere. So I don't know the exact amount. So, but what I did know was that we had everything that we used in the film, we had the right to use. Everything that's not in the film, it's probably because we didn't have the rights. So, that helped to shape some of the songs that you hear in the film were based on the rights issues.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of industry talk on this podcast, but I know that the music is a soundtrack of a time. And I remember saying that Bob Marley's music was for people who didn't read the newspapers to get the news. So I think music rights, all these kind of rights, people need to be aware of how they're being distributed, and hopefully will stay out there for many, many more years, forever, as long as we listen to music. So as you're on this experience and this journey with Bob Marley and the film, what did you learn that you didn't know about him and his impact as an artist in Jamaica and beyond?
We tried to represent that in the film. I didn't know his relationship to Rita and her involvement in his life, not only as the matriarch of the family, but as a band member. So I didn't know just how close friends they were, and sort of unconventional relationship, and their unconventional love story in a lot of ways. So that was something that I learned that I thought could be represented. And then I didn't quite know just how hard Bob worked. I think there's an assumption, like I said, even when you see something that works, you think it comes natural to people. And I think yes, I think he naturally was a storyteller, but I think he worked at that storytelling. He was relentless in his work ethic. I didn't know that. You see Bob and he seems sort of chill and relaxed, and it's a vibe. But I don't think he was just vibing. He was he was working relentlessly. They say he didn't sleep; he just rested his eyes, and I believe it. In order to accomplish what he accomplished in his short life, he had to be working around the clock. You can't have that much outpouring of music, recordings, without a relentless work ethic. And learning those aspects about him just only made me fall in love with him more. Music just didn't fall out of the sky. He treated his work like a football player, like any sport or any athlete. He went after it in a way that just makes you feel like, wow, like somebody's working at their talents and their gifts. He wasn't just, wasn't resting on any laurels. He wasn't saying, oh, I'm great, and come to me. He was going after it. And I don't know, there's something inspirational about that greatness. I heard Pierce Brosnan speak last night, and here he is, James Bond, and he's still, going after it like, a kid. And it was kind of, I think any greatness comes from that type of relentless pursuit of it. And I just, there's a newfound respect for what he was after. And I think the other thing about Bob, I think because the music is so light, there's a fair amount of the music that is light and kind of happy. There's an assumption that his life was such, and it was everything but. I didn't know Bob was homeless. I didn't know that. Yes, I knew he was mixed race, but I didn't know that his father was white and that his father had abandoned him. I didn't know that he grew up on the streets of Trenchtown in the way that he grew up, that he, essentially could have been a gangster. Music saved his life. I didn't know those details about his childhood that I thought really obviously helps to inform even a lot of the communities that we grew up from. I think about where I'm from and some of my best friends that have never made it out, some of them that are behind bars, kids that I grew up with. And so you're just like in the same community, how one could go on to direct, Will Smith, and the other one is sitting in Rikers Island. And knowing that Bob grew up in those kind of environments, and how easy it is that Bob Marley is not here. If music doesn't save his life, he's, maybe he doesn't even live to 36. So just those kind of details about his life I found very fascinating. And it informs who the man is, and what he was able to accomplish during his lifespan.
Again, the power of the arts.
Yeah, it does save lives. Ronaldo, I read an interview in Music Bed online where you talked about the power of narrative film to put you in situations rather than just show you situations. And in this podcast, we talk about narrative film having the power to give you a sense of what the past was like, and as Michonne often says, how we got here, but also who we are, today. And but I love this quote where you said, "Film is a chance to change our fate." And One Love is this biopic, a narrative about a very influential, real human being and the historical context that they were shaped in. What are you seeing as Bob Marley's possible impact on younger people today, and what would you hope audiences will take away from One Love?
Yeah, it's sort of baked in the title, that there's one love, one heart, unity, that we're stronger together, especially in communities like ours, underrepresented communities where, they've sort of been historically passed on that there's only a few of us that get a chance to make it. And that mindset is very limiting. And I think the more we can embrace each other, the more that we can lift each other up, the more that we can support one another, that we can create opportunities for a lot more of us to succeed and continue to grow, because we're much stronger together as a community. It's inherent in the music. It's inherent in the title. Thinking about that article that you were talking about, I think about the scene with Bob playing Redemption Song with his kids around the fire. And in the original script, there were no kids in there. And I thought, okay, well, we're making a movie, and the movie is about the next generation. The movie is about the kids who are the future. And that's who that song is for. And so in thinking about that, we were able to bring the children into that scene. It was definitely way past their bedtime. But in movie language, we could create an opportunity where you see that he's passing this on to the next generation. You see that he's passing it on to his children, who are passing it on to their children. And it's a subtle way to say, yeah, of course the kids are there. But then if you think about it, you're like, it's 10 o'clock at night. Those kids would have definitely been sleeping. Okay. There's no way that they would have been out there listening to his dad play a song by the fire. But in our version of the film, and in our version of being able to create something fictional, you can visually pass it on. And so that's all we're trying to do is trying to find ways to continue to pass on Bob's legacy, at least in this particular film. It's in messaging. It's in who the movie is for. Yes, I learned about Bob. I'm still learning about Bob, but it's more important that they learn about Bob, and that they share his music and his message with as many people as they can. Because I think it's one that can, not only help you personally, but also, impact how you think about the world, and the part you play in it.
Yeah. Well, Reinaldo, we've come to the part of our podcast we call our lightning round. We kind of borrowed this from the Actors Studio. So everyone who comes on the podcast gets 2 questions that reflect the themes of historical drama with the Boston Sisters. There are no prizes, by the way. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question 1. If you could travel back in time, where would you go and why?
It's lightning. Oh, I'm supposed to be fast.
Nobody is.
We actually had actual lightning and thunder. And
you might have to edit this lightning. This is a slow lightning. My lightning's a little slow. Where would I go and why? Man. Yeah, I mean, interesting. I think I would go to the March on Washington, or the moments right before, and what that must have felt like to be there and be a part of something that changed history forever. Yeah, I think when I think about, I look at the photo and you see, Martin looking out, and just what it must have felt like to be a Black man or woman at that moment, seeing yourself reflected with your brothers and sisters. And yeah, that must have been a life-changing moment. Something that, imprinted on your mind forever. So I think that would have been a moment to be a part of, to see, to feel. I felt that way when Obama got elected, for sure. I remember exactly where I was in New York City. I remember being with my brother. I remember what I was wearing. I remember what street. It was just one of those. I could probably name 3 of those moments in my life, and So that's one moment I think I would have liked to have witnessed.
Okay, well, our second question is, and you mentioned 3 moments, so maybe this would apply. What 3 items would you put in a time capsule that represent your history and the times you've lived?
uh, 3 items. I would put. We have a baseball from 1986 Mets, signed by the 1986 Mets. My dad was a baseball fanatic, and he would take us to go see the games and get autographs from the players. So baseball is it's part of my directing style as a coach. It's been an impactful thing in my life. So I would take that baseball because it represents my dad. It represents all the years that I spent playing, all the years that I've dedicated to the sport, but also baseball as life, and my dedication to that particular team. So I would put that baseball in there. I would put my marriage certificate. I guess when you say yes to another person for the rest of your life, it has to mean something. Um, my family ended in divorce, and that could happen to anybody. But I think, when you commit yourself to another human being, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of commitment on both sides. Um, and I don't take that lightly. So I would put that in there because I think it represents every relationship I had before.
Mhm.
It represents my children, and the pact that we made for them. Uh, it represents their birth certificates in a lot of ways. So I'd put that in there. And yeah, I would put. What else would I put in there? It has to be a single item.
Well,
Well,
some
it could be a
people group
collection.
things,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a pretty vast hat collection, and I've collected hats for many years, and yeah, I probably have over 300 plus hats.
Wow, you
I think
compete
those,
with the shoe
Whoa.
people.
yeah, it's like yeah, definitely hats are a little cheaper than shoes,
Are
a
you like
little
the
bit.
Carrie Bradshaw of hats?
I'm pretty, yeah. One day it'll be worth something. So, I think I'm often photographed in hats as a director, and I wore hats my whole life as a baseball player, and I've just always been a hat collector, and I think those hats represent me, my style, my mood, colors that I've chosen, the logos on them, the teams that I was a part of. So I think those hats tell a story, and I'd put my hat collection in there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do something just a little different because you are a writer as well as a director and producer. So we're curious, what stories of your own creation do you want to tell? Maybe give us a little preview of a future film or films.
Yeah, so I'm working on one now about a time. So I mentioned earlier that I grew up in a single parent household with my father, and uh, so my parents got divorced when I was 8, and my mom moved out. And it wasn't until college, till I was a young man at 18, that I had a short stint that I went to go live with my mother. And so there was the 10-year absence, essentially, of living with each other and not really knowing a lot about her personal life. And so I'm working on a movie that is about that period of time that I went to go live with my mom, now as an 18-year-old man who's trying to understand what it's like to date and, yeah, become a man. with the absence of a mom. And so I think it's pretty funny. There's a lot of irony in there and a lot of dramedy for sure. I had a Puerto Rican mother from the South Bronx, and you can only imagine what that must have been like as a grown man coming to live with your single mom, by the way, single mom. So she was dating as well, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, we're always interested in untold stories, and that one sounds like one we'll definitely look forward to.
Yes, everyone's looking for. There are so many stories about parenting and growing up that I'm sure people are going to dig into that one and look forward to it. Reinaldo, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're so happy to have you here and enjoyed Bob Marley, One Love, because it was a movie we just needed to see at this time. Definitely.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Paramount's Bob Marley, One Love is directed by Reinaldo Marcus Green and features Kingsley Ben-Adir as the legendary musician Bob Marley and Lashana Lynch as Rita Marley. By the time you download this podcast, you'll be able to order it for streaming, but also check where Bob Marley, One Love may be playing in a movie theater near you.
We invite you to share this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters with someone you know who would enjoy the conversation. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters and enjoy past episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content. You can write us at podcast@michonnebostongroup.com. Like and share Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your social media.
This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast about historical films and series dramas. Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
Tell us what historical dramas you're watching. Who knows? We may do a show about it. Sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with the people you know who binge on historical drama.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michonne Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michonne Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston. Thank you for listening.